welcome to our second alumni chat of fall 2022. Can't believe we're in mid-September. I want to thank Julia Heckelman for joining us today. A little bit about Julia. She is currently attending law school at Columbia, and previously she worked at Rolling Stone and Sony Music. She is a 2019 graduate, and her major was American Studies. So Julia, before we go to your decision to go to law school, because I know we will talk about that, I want to linger on a little bit about your time in music, because when I knew you and for the first few things that you did after school, it definitely was in Rolling Stone, I think, was during school, and then Sony Music was the job afterwards. So if you can talk to us a little bit about your experience at both, that would be great. And then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, definitely. So I was an American Studies major, and I kind of tailored my classes and everything that I was taking to music. So I started to really get this idea that maybe this thing that I was so passionate about could actually become a career. And so my junior year, I started thinking, more seriously about that and about what I was going to do after graduation. And I stumbled upon a small Yes, I was also in the Phantoms. I stumbled upon a small record label. It was under the Sony Music umbrella, but it kind of functioned like an independent label, and it was called Descendant Records. And so I just, out of the blue, cold emailed the president of the label, and I wrote to him because I had seen that he was an American Studies major, and I wrote up a little email and told him that I was really passionate about music. I really wanted to break in, and that I would really love to intern for him if he had any space. And so I ended up getting an email back from him, which was surprising and wonderful. And then that was my first, real internship during college. And it was an incredible experience. I was doing A&R and digital marketing. So I got to kind of see a little bit of what goes on at a label. So I got to do some, talent searching, and then also, what you would think of with digital marketing, like managing the social media profiles and things like that. And I really loved it. I thought it was a fantastic experience. And from there, I, started to get, again, more serious, really thinking that this is what I wanted to do. And I really liked at that point in time, the marketing portion that I was doing. I obviously love music, but I don't really have the ear for A&R. So I wanted to go in that direction. And then kind of similarly, I had really been passionate about Rolling Stone for my whole life. As a big music nerd, it was like the, ultimate goal of somebody who loves music and loves writing and everything to do with that. So I knew that they had interns, and I kind of had gotten an idea of their posting schedule of when they had put up previous positions. So I kind of had an application locked and loaded, and I would check every so often on LinkedIn or on their website to see if they had, gotten any openings. And I managed to get that internship, which was really incredible. And so I did marketing there. And with that program, I got to see the ad sales and live marketing, and then just, general marketing teams. And I was working directly with all of them. So that was, a really intense, but really rewarding experience. And I feel like I got to do, a lot of really creative work. And I also really found there that I enjoyed learning a lot about the business principles that were underneath marketing, kind of beyond just, putting together the pitch decks and things like that. And so when I was looking for full-time jobs, I kind of wanted a position that, let me see more of the world and not just the marketing side of things. So I worked at Sony after graduation in the business and legal affairs department. And I was assisting 3 attorneys, and I definitely got to see the legal side, which, has led me to where I am today in school. But also got a lot of exposure to, the daily procedures of a lot of the people, on the business affairs side of things and the finance side of things. So it was really just, I think, a great overarching view of what the industry is like.
That's great. And as you were talking, there were so many little things I wanted to pull out, like the first of all, the cold calling, basically, so that
Mhm.
you that piece and the networking. We'll get to that. But you had mentioned, after doing A&R, you're like, no, not for me. But so a lot of students, when they come in, they're just thinking about roles in music. So maybe more on the business side, that kind of thing. So if somebody were to come to you and say, well, what can I do? Well,
Mhm.
what is A&R, and what are some of the roles that you see entry level folks doing?
Yeah, definitely. So A&R is artists and repertoire. So these are the people that are bringing in talent to the labels, evaluating talent, kind of working with, the musicians that are coming in to the labels and really just developing them and developing their business. Because at the end of the day, the music industry is a business of a lot of individual people's businesses. And so it's a really great position if you find yourself to be a really creatively minded person, if you know a lot about the music that is behind these corporations. I think it's a really cool thing to do if that's your speed. I think my taste was just a little too specific. um, but some other things that I see people do in the industry entry level, you can there most of the positions are going to be something like an assistant or a coordinator for a particular department. So you'll have most major labels, you'll have like a marketing department, but you might also have a finance department. So, I know some people that had gone in and had done like a rotational internship in the summer for the finance program and then ended up at Sony Music doing, what somebody might do at a big bank, but doing it at a record label, which I think is really cool. And you don't necessarily have to, work at one of these big banks to do that. There is a pathway for that, which I think is really important to know. And it's really, an interesting world. And then something else that I also, had considered myself at the time that I was looking at jobs was communications. Most, major labels, which if you don't know is like Sony Music, Universal Music, Warner Music, they have corporate communications departments that, handle all of the um, publicity sorts of issues that come up. Like maybe there's a huge scandal, like how does the company approach communicating to the public, like what that means for the business. But then also, a lot of more internal stuff too, of like communicating to the employees, like here's, what's been happening during the pandemic, like should you be worried about your job, whatever. So I think that's also a really interesting career path for somebody who, enjoys writing and enjoys like this like aspect of communication that's like so relevant in all of our lives, but also wants to do something specific to music. And then I think aside from like those sorts of roles, which I feel like mainly exist in the big three music companies and probably in a lot of the smaller ones as well, you have talent agencies which hire just assistants to, sort of specific departments like music touring or music licensing. And I think that that's also a really interesting way to see the world and kind of, get your footing in a business environment. So I feel like those are the main ones I would definitely look out for.
That's great. Yeah, Julie, as I was thinking, like students that come in, they run the gamut from, wanting record labels to even looking at places like Sirius or
Mhm.
Spotify or the streaming services. Are there any of the streaming services that you think, oh, they're doing some cool stuff, or anything you can think of, like music adjacent, that you're like, oh, that's neat to kind of think about too?
Yeah, I would definitely take a close look at a lot of the tech companies. So, you have Spotify, which is kind of an obvious one, and they're truly the leader in the space, in my opinion. But I think what some people don't necessarily know is that most of these major tech companies, like Apple and like Facebook or Meta or whatever it is now, they have their own in-house music teams as well, because a lot of them have, some really intense volume of music licensing. Like for example, Meta, on Instagram, like they need to license their music. They need a group of people who do that. So if you're somebody who straddles this world of wanting to be in tech because it's the hot thing, but you also want to be able to kind of see your passion through, there's places for you at Amazon or at Meta or any of these big companies as well, which I think is something I didn't necessarily realize when I was graduating, because I probably would have thought more seriously about it.
That's great. That's great. So as I'm thinking about all of these various things, tech companies like,
Mhm.
where they had that crossover between media and tech.
Mhm.
um, every industry and job function has its own timelines. Now, you're not a
Mhm.
recruiter, you're just Julia who got through this career path. But if you were to kind of broadly advise students that are either at the internship side
Mhm.
or maybe at the first, like kind of graduating, like if I were to ask you, so what's the timeline for this?
Mhm.
When should I start looking? What
Mhm.
what would you generally say?
I would say this is probably going to be the most frustrating part of your experience breaking into the music industry. The timeline is, not going to be like a lot of what you see from your peers at Georgetown who are going into consulting or going into finance. There's really no structure for when the recruiting season, so to speak, is. So I would say in general, when it came to internships, I feel like most music internships were posted, maybe, and this is for the summer. Most of them I think were posted in the early spring. I would say that I remember interviewing in like late March or April for summer internships. And kind of similarly, when it comes to full-time jobs, I feel like, you know, again, a little bit frustrating is that these positions are filled as needed. So, they're not bringing in a class of 20 legal assistants in the Department of Sony Music. It's kind of just who is there when the time is right. But I would say that because a lot of these entry level positions are, of course, filled by college graduates, that, there is kind of a cycle of maybe 2 or 3 years where, they leave to go on to do something else. And I do think that there end up being quite a few positions. And, I saw this when I was applying, but definitely in general, don't apply to things until you are maybe 2 months until graduation at the earliest, because most of these companies want somebody who can start ASAP. And I know that's true of the agencies as well. They kind of, they cycle on their own sort of timeline. So it's important to not get discouraged just because you're not maybe seeing the thing that's the perfect fit, or you're not hearing back from something that you applied to in January. It's mainly just because that's not really the timeline they operate on. So just, hold fast, hold steady, but like the jobs will come.
Yes, and I think agreed. That's the most frustrating thing for those interested in music media, all of it. There are maybe some early ones, but you're right. Early spring is probably the time generally to start looking. I
Mhm.
saw the United Talent Agency started their opening up for their summer program, but that's now, and that's the part of the frustrating thing is that they're early and
Mhm.
most things are in spring. And so my best advice is setting job alerts. Uh, so moving on as we're kind of prepping for that internship and first job, thinking through, and this is again super broad because we're talking about recording companies and talent agencies, but like, are you seeing like there's certain skills that people are looking for that you brought in, qualities that recruiters are looking for? And again, I don't expect you to know all, but
Mhm.
anything that you've broadly seen that could be helpful for a student to develop hard or soft skills.
Yeah. I guess in terms of hard skills, I think those are probably the easiest to discuss. But, I think that most people you work with will be really happy because you'll be a younger person entering the workforce who probably knows how to handle technology a lot, a lot better than your managers do. I think that that was, kind of funny to me when my bosses would ask me for help with Microsoft Word. So, coming out of a school like Georgetown, I'm sure that you all know how to do those sorts of things. So know that those are, really actually an advantage. And then in terms of soft skills, I think the most important thing you can learn is just communication. Good communication skills, I think, are paramount to having success in this industry. And, I think the first part of that is just, knowing how to talk to people and be, an open, friendly person and know that everybody's just trying to get through their day. And I think that once you kind of master your in-person soft skills and you master, the art of writing an email and things like that, that's really something that's welcomed in the business in your first couple steps. And, nobody's expecting you to be perfect when you start an entry-level job. And hopefully, like me, like you have bosses that kind of help you shuffle yourself along and learn the ropes. But I think just being open to talking to people, because that's how you learn. And you need to, be brave about your questions and ask them when you have them. And I think that that's really what carries you to success.
Great, fantastic. And I think lastly, as well, while we're on music, because I want to go to law school, because I'm sure there's folks on the call that are like, how you made that transition, what that looks like. If there's any trends you're seeing, so like in maybe the music industry, or maybe when you left the music industry, because I'm now you're fully wedded to law school, but anything that's helpful for students to know as they're seeing, as they're starting to look.
Yeah, I would definitely, and I'm sure that this is nothing crazy, but I think the tech world and all of that, I think, has really changed music. And I think that, if I think something that's really interesting is the people who are, on the more STEM side of things in like software engineering or something like that. I think that that's, something really interesting and something that you can also teach yourself. And I think that that's, something that's really necessary in the music world right now, and something that's really hot to hire. And then I think this kind of goes back to what I was saying before, but, a lot of these big tech companies having their own music in-house teams, I think, is also really cool, because it means that there's, there are more spots for people, and there's like more, diversity out there in terms of the options that you have as a new graduate. So I think that those are really the main major trends. I think that, yeah, music always changes, and what's popular in terms of music will always change. And I think that there's also something to say for like the independent labels that are, fighting against the grain of the three major music labels. So I think that, this is kind of, I guess, sort of the path that I had taken originally, of like kind of focusing in on a smaller label with a smaller team. I think that that's a great way to start your career too. And I also think that as, as these industries develop, that the independent music labels probably will become bigger in the next couple of years, as they kind of like fight the monopoly of the big three.
Okay, I'm curious, and maybe at the end you can say like maybe what is a favorite independent label that you're following. Well, I don't know, any thoughts?
Yeah, there are really a lot of great ones. I feel like if any of you guys listen to Phoebe Bridgers, check out her label. There's also Big Machine, which is known in Nashville for like a lot of really interesting original kind of country artists. That's cool. They had Taylor Swift. Like, there's really just a lot of like, I would just recommend, like looking up like some of your favorite artists, and I guarantee you that many of them are, represented on some independent labels.
Great. All right. So we'll end on the music piece, although that's still going to be there, because I know your ultimate interest is kind of coming back to music. But so now we'll switch to the law side, because I know that I'll often get students that will come in to see me and say they're interested in a kind of a, if they're interested in the legal field, but also music and how to cross that. So maybe talking about what was your decision, like why did you choose then to go to law school? And for those students that are interested in that intersection between law and music, how do you see it playing out for yourself? And what is your advice?
Yeah, so I think for me, the thing that eventually pushed me to go to law school, even though like I feel like as somebody who went to Georgetown and wasn't a humanities major, it's like kind of always in the back of your head. But what ultimately led me to take the plunge was my first job out of college, which was in the business and legal affairs department of Sony. And, I was working for the litigation, compliance, and privacy teams, but I also was working on the floor with a lot of other lawyers who were in, every sort of practice area you could imagine, like people doing mergers and acquisitions, people focusing like on new technology. So I really got exposure to, just how many even in this umbrella of music law, like just how many fragments and practice groups and really interesting things there were. And I just really enjoyed my job so much and enjoyed the idea of just always learning. I think that's an emphasis in the legal field. And I think it was something that was emphasized by my bosses who became my mentors. And so when I was, really seriously evaluating what to do with my next steps in my career, I just saw myself really wanting to be where the people I worked for were. And, that's what ultimately made me push me to do it, because I, really saw that as something that I would find really exciting. And yeah, so I ended up going to law school, obviously. And I think that, you can find your way into music law in a lot of different ways. There were people who worked in the legal department at Sony who had gone straight out of law school. They knew that they wanted to work in music law specifically. They did everything that you would do in undergrad to, make yourself look desirable for music, which is doing a lot of music internships and, taking the entertainment law classes and taking the copyright classes and, all of these things that typically align with the music industry. But there are also a lot of people, and I think primarily people who have had experience at more general firms, which I think is something that I didn't necessarily realize until I started working. So, a lot of people will go to one of these really huge corporate law firms with many, many, many departments. You could be in the insurance department, you could be in the mergers and acquisitions department. And you just kind of learn your craft really well in that space and, have the sort of mentorship that most in-house legal teams at music companies can't necessarily give you. They just, wouldn't have the time, they don't have the infrastructure. And then, I think that this is the path that I'll ultimately take. And I hope that because I've had the experiences I've had and, the work experience and, I'm doing a lot of extracurriculars in law school now that I think directly relate to music. I'm hoping that I'll be able to work at a firm, find out what it is specifically in the legal world that I really like to do, not just the industry group of music, but what sort of, smaller thing I really vibe with. And then I'll take that experience and hopefully be able to find myself back in music in a couple of years.
That's great. And I'm also thinking through, like, some students come in and think, oh, if I'm interested in doing law and music, should I start off being a paralegal or do something that's like work at a law firm? And you didn't. And so the advice that I know generally from a pre-law advisor is that do the thing that you want to do, like you enjoy it. And, so in your case, it was music. Would you give similar advice?
Yeah, I would definitely give similar advice. I mean, I was in the business and legal affairs department, and I kind of was a legal assistant, I would say. So for me, like, I do think a lot of what I did parallels what a paralegal would do, and that experience has been super helpful. But, I'm now really good friends with a lot of people who also ultimately want to end up in music. And I think that if I could emphasize anything, it's just working before you go to law school, in general, in anything. And if it's in music, that's amazing. If it's not, and that's the world you want to be in, there's still a way into it. It's not the end of the world. But I do think it's so important to have, some idea of corporate know-how and, some idea of whether or not you actually like what you're doing, because you might end up in a job that is something you're really passionate about, and then you realize, oh, maybe law wasn't for me, or maybe it's the opposite. I just think that work experience is really, really valued, regardless of what it is. I would say that going through the interview process for internships this past summer and internships for this coming summer, it's really great to be able to, talk about the things that I've learned while working and tie it back in to what I would do at a firm or, eventually at a music company. So I would say that you don't have to be a paralegal. There's a lot you're going to learn in that sort of a role that's super helpful for law school. But, I think just anything where you're working really hard and you're learning and you're getting mentorship. I wouldn't be too picky about your first jobs.
Thanks, Julia. I'm trying to think if there's any, I've hit most of my questions. The only question that I think I'll end with, which I should have I should have put it in with the music section, is the dreaded networking question, which is, should I do it? Is it important? Why? I always reframe networking as relationship building. What are your thoughts about how relationship building was in your process in music and law, all of that? And I'll take your answer, and then maybe we'll go to some live questions.
Yeah. So I know that networking is tough. That's for sure. But I would say that it is really, I think, the most important thing you can do, even if it's not conscious. You know, the people who you work with and who you're going to school with are your colleagues. And, you know, I think that's also something interesting, is the people, you know, that are in this Zoom right now in the boxes next to you might end up being people that you work with down the road. And I think it doesn't have to be so disingenuous as, I'm reaching out to somebody because I really need something, and that's the basis of the conversation. I think it's so much better to start, you know, relationship building when you're not necessarily asking someone for something. You just want to hear what they've done and what they've liked, and, you know, how they've gotten to where they are. And I think that, you know, I kind of came at it in college as just being naturally really curious and really confused about what I wanted to do. And to me, it seemed like the best option just to learn is to reach out to as many people as you can. And I would say it's definitely a little bit of an art. And, you know, the first couple times that you do it, you'll probably have to, you know, write down a couple of questions to keep you on track and, you know, make sure that you're hitting all of your points. But I would just highly recommend reaching out to people. And there are a lot of ways to do that. I'm sure the Career Center has ways to connect you with alumni beyond just being on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn's also a great way to do it. It's just like filtering by Georgetown and, you know, seeing who's working at the companies you like, even if it's not in the capacity of something that you think that you'd be particularly interested in. It's really great to just hear about what it's like to work at a company. And I think that for me, it's been a really proven way of getting to where I wanted to be. My cold email to the first record label that I worked at ended up working out. And, you know, it's like, that could be you. There's, you know, I think the best piece of advice that I ever got while I first started working was that the answer is no until you ask. There might not even be a job posting. Just ask. Or, you know, there might be somebody who will take you to a music festival and show you backstage. You just got to ask. And just start with commonalities, whether it's your major or it's Georgetown, or maybe you're from the same hometown. I think that there are just so many ways to connect with people like that. And, you know, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but really every job that I've gotten, I'm sure my credentials had something to do with it, but it was because I connected with somebody who worked there. I mean, at Rolling Stone, I found somebody through a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend who had previously worked there. And he happened to have a really great relationship with the people who still worked there. And, you know, without even me asking, gave me a recommendation. And even with my full-time job, which, you know, I had kind of forgotten to say, but I think is really important, was I got that, I think, mainly through the GMA externship, which is a really great resource. I don't know if they're still doing it, but I assume so. But, you know, through that, I met with, I don't even know, maybe like 40 people over the course of a week. And one of them happened to be the person who hired me into my job in like, you know, a month later. And she had remembered me from the GMA interviews, and her assistant was leaving, and she knew that this role was opening up and was like, please come in and interview. You know, it's as simple as that. And it doesn't have to be, it wasn't like I knew that that was going to happen when I met her, but, you know, I just talked to her and really liked her and, you know, asked her about her life. And it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be as scary and cold as it sounds, because most people are going to remember intimately well how scary it is to be in your position, especially in music, because it's such a hard world to get into. So I think that I've never had someone really tell me no to just talking to them for 15 minutes about where they are.
No, thank you for that. And I guess following is that too, is when you're reaching out to folks, sometimes you don't hear back, but it's not usually because you're bothering them at all. It's just usually about volume of emails. So But people are so gracious, and I found alumni to be so gracious. And Julia mentioned GEMA, which is the Georgetown Entertainment Media Alliance. So for those of you, no matter what year you're in, you can, if you just Google GEMA and Georgetown, the GEMA website will pop up, and you can join pretty easily through there. It's free, and then you'll get the GEMA newsletter and events that are happening and coming up. And if you are a senior or a graduate student, Julia was talking about the externship. She applied and successfully, and so went on a week's worth of informational interviews. And I think, Julia, you went to New York.
Yeah, I was in New York.
New York. So if you want to know more about that, please feel free to talk to me. But so Julia, I'm going to end the recorded version now. So those of you who are watching on the recording, thank you for joining. Those of you who are live, if you just want to hold on, we will be with you in a second.